questions. We've got everyone muted, but you can control your own muting capability. So if at any point you do have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and jump in, and I'll be happy to go back over anything that we need to. Just so I can see who all's on here, you don't have to be nervous to think that all the content we're going to go through, that we are going to be trying to teach you everything that you would be teaching your board. We understand that the info that we're going to go through in this presentation, you all are very familiar with, so it's going to be more of us covering what we think you should include in a board training as opposed to trying to go through that training right now. And you'll see what we did. Instead of starting from scratch, we had both Robin Pope from ARC and then Brett Lacey from Fulton submitted the PowerPoint presentations that they have used for their board training or that they plan to use in the near future. And so I just kind of went through there and pulled out the best of both to combine them into one kind of master presentation that I think covers all of the information that I think would be helpful to you and your board members. As we know, as you guys that have been in the system a while, you understand that WIOA gives, but we'll push on so we get started. But we're just saying, the whole reason we wanted to have this training today is because, as you know, WIOA places a tremendous amount of authority in our local board members. And so we know it's in your best interest to ensure that your local board members fully understand, one, what their responsibilities are in serving on your local board, and two, that they understand the network that they are working within. As we all know, we work within a pretty complex and convoluted system that comes with a lot of rules and regulations. And so trying to understand that can be a challenge, and I know at times it can seem overwhelming to try to bring new board members up to speed quickly, and we're hoping that today will be a glimpse of how you might can build out a system that will help you accomplish that. This is by no means going to be comprehensive. There will be things that we miss and we leave out, but the reason we wanted to try to take this approach is at the state level when we look at, and we have had requests for, to try to help train board members, there's no way with the amount of turnover and change that you guys experience on your local boards that we could effectively hold enough training sessions to keep all local board members up to date. So we think the better approach is to try to give you guys the tools you need. A lot of you already have these tools, so we don't want you to assume that we think you're starting from scratch. But there hopefully today will be things that you may not have considered and some information that you can then take and tailor. So we'll dive right in. First thing I was going to show is, so this you'll see when it comes up, so this is from Brett. They just did their board retreat training a few weeks ago, and you'll see the agenda. I just want to show you an example agenda of how they broke it down, and I thought it worked well to kind of put this into bite-sized pieces over a full day. And so this is one. This is what we're going to have Keith on, and I'll let Brett jump in later as well to kind of talk about their lessons learned. But I thought it was a good way the way they broke this up between Block 1 and Block 2 of the different topics and the deep dives of different aspects of what they do as a local area. So that their board can try to take this in. As you know, this is a lot of information, and I don't think you should expect any of your board members to sit through these presentations and walk away experts. And so I think it's important to put these into bite-sized pieces and even to have some repetition in there. I took some of that repetition out just for the sake of this presentation, but I don't think it's bad the way Brett had it laid out to where you covered a few topics like our funding streams, like eligibility, multiple times throughout the day to ensure that they can begin to grasp that. We still have an issue with audio?
Yeah, and the call-in numbers. Let's see.
The way he does his, and again, I said we'll let Brett, chime in a little bit later to talk about how he thought theirs went and things if he keep it the same or if he changed anything. But again, I was there to speak during theirs, and I thought the way they laid it out made a lot of sense and was a good use of the time for the day. So the first thing you'll see as we go in, I think it's important to kind of explain the history of how the workforce system has come to be over time. I think a lot of the questions we'll get often from partners and from outside vendors even is, should we be concerned with this being a federal grant, that this is going to go away at any time? We know that Congress can be volatile, and so should we expect these grant funds to be ended any day now, and so we should really get involved. And so I think it's important to explain the history from Senate to JTPA to WIA, CETA, excuse me, so that people can understand this is a network that has been around a long time. And while, yes, we have been sometimes at the whims of, congressional infighting, the system itself is very bipartisan. It has bipartisan support, and we shouldn't be concerned about where these funds are going to be or go. While our funding levels may go up and down depending on congressional activity or the economy, this is something that's been around for a long time. And looking at how the frequency of reauthorization in the past, it's not something that we should expect major changes every few years. We'll see again when it's reauthorized in 2020 if changes come. But again, I think it's good to kind of give this background so they understand what preceded WIOA and WIA to see that this is not something new. Again, this is just that was weird. I think some slides that do a good job of kind of showing the overall vision of WIOA, what we're trying to accomplish, and how our system is kind of laid out through these three pillars of our workforce system. Again, I think it's a great way to explain how our services are delivered and how we're structured as a system. Again, here is this is a slide that kind of shows the 6 broad goals that we are trying to accomplish over throughout the system, throughout the state. And so again, I think this is a good one. That's just some background information that you can share with your board members to give them that idea. The next is when it's starting to describe.
Let's see if we hear anything. Oh, we can't hear anything. Got speakers off.
Maybe somebody needs to mute in the background because it's getting feedback on their computer. Yeah, everybody, make sure your computer's muted. It sounds like someone just joined in, and I think that's what's happening. You may have multiple people in a room that's got the audio competing with itself. But pressing on, so you'll see this is just kind of explaining the 4 different titles within WIOA. I think this is important as we try to explain to our board members how our 4 core partners work. It's important at this point to explain where each of those 4 titles, or the main 4 titles at least, where they sit at the state level, so they can understand the relationship between us here at TCSG, where we have Title I and we have Title II Adult Ed Services, with Title III sitting at GDOL, and then Title IV being at GVRA. Again, I think it's important to kind of give that background information so they can understand how those, all are technically part of WIOA under the new reauthorization, but how those 4 different titles work within WIOA at the same time. This was a good slide from ARC that I think, while it looks like a lot, I think when you really dive into it, you can see it's a good graphic to explain how the workforce ecosystem works for ARC from USDOL down to them at the local level and how their services are delivered. Again, this is something I think each of you could tailor if there's changes in this regard in terms of what your local board looks like, what your LEO board looks like. And so I think this is another just a good graphic that you can use to try to show your board how the system works. This is a slide that was in both ARC and Fulton that's just showing those WIOA core partners and the required partners, showing the different federal programs that operate within each state and where they are housed with our state partners. Again, just another good background slide to give them an idea of how things sit at the state level. This is a slide from ARC's presentation that just kind of shows the network statewide, both from an area perspective and a region perspective, and then breaking that down, as you see, they blew up kind of Region 3 to show how ARC fits within the region. For the areas that have multiple areas within a region, I think it's important to kind of explain to your board how that dynamic works, of how you do have your own autonomy as an area, but that how we are now at the federal level and state level requiring more regional cooperation and regional activity. And so I think that's an important conversation to have at this point so they can kind of understand how those relate. This is just a slide that's kind of showing the message we always say of having 2 customers between employers and individuals, and begins to get into those, how our funds are allocated in 3 streams. I think it's important to show, as you see here where Fulton showed how much we get as a state and then how much they receive of that state allocation each year. I think that's important for your board members to understand perspective of this is a lot of money, and it's a lot of money that we're working with, and we have a responsibility to be good stewards of those dollars and to make sure we're spending them well. This is then beginning to take a deeper dive into those 3 funding streams to show how our money is divided between adult, dislocated worker, and youth. I think this is a good time to begin to have the conversation about your ability to transfer back and forth between adult and dislocated worker, depending on the activity you have going on at the time. This is when you can also explain it the same way at the state level, and you can talk about the 15% state holdback, and then can also discuss how that 25% of our dislocated worker funds have been outsourced to GDOL for our rapid response work. I think because this is so core to our funding and our program delivery, I think this is part of something that you want to make sure your board totally gets before you move on. Fulton also showed, they then put numbers to that, so they built these allocations out to show not just the distribution of the three, but how much statewide, how many funds are going to each of those, and I thought that was a good representation to show their board exactly where the monies fall. This, again, I thought was the first time I'd seen, and I thought was really good to begin to show, because a lot of people say, well, how is this money determined? Did the feds do it? Does the state do it? And I think it was good for him to show that federal funding allocation formula for each one so that people can understand this is in the weeds, and they don't have to know this information to operate on a daily basis. But if they ever are curious of exactly how it's determined, how much money goes to each state for each funding stream, I think this was a good explanation to show your board members of how that actually works out. Again, it's another graphic that's showing from ARC standpoint how their funding stream flows from top to bottom, starting with USDOL through us here at TCSG, down to them as the fiscal agent at ARC, and then to their contractors. I think this is one that we have to explain a lot to outside partners and vendors of how our funding actually hits the ground. And so I definitely think as you have new board members, it's important for them to understand that dynamic of relationship between the fiscal agent, the service delivery contractors, how that money flows, and how the oversight and monitoring of that works. This is then starting to get into eligibility. As we know, eligibility is complex, and I think this is trying to give your high-level basic eligibility, which I think is important, and then you'll obviously get into more of a deep dive later on. But I think it's important for them to understand the difference in the participants that we serve, especially down to the in-school, out-of-school youth, so that you can then set this up for later on when you begin to discuss about the parameters you have about what you can and can't spend money on from an in-school, out-of-school youth standpoint. Another one then when it's talking about, this is ARC's graphic that's showing programs and service delivery. Another graphic that I think, again, does a good job of kind of show how our services are dividing into those three categories, and then how that then can be divided up among different contractors that are trying to serve each of those populations. Some areas have a contractor that serves all three, some contract out just to youth providers, and so I think it's important that you customize that for your local area so your board members can understand exactly how your delivery works. This I thought was a neat slide as well that ARC put together to show all of where their comprehensive one-stops are, where their affiliate sites are. Again, I think this will be helpful for your board members to understand your geographic layout within your area and region. It's probably going to hit home for them, so they may not know that there was an affiliate site close to where they live or work. And so I think this will help as you try to recruit them to now go out and be, for lack of a better term, evangelists for your work, to begin to spread the message within the community to your business partners, your community leaders of where you're located and how you can have an impact in your area and region. So then this is just nothing new, but this is just beginning to describe the difference between how our services are delivered. So starting with basic career services and understanding that that's available to everyone, and then once you begin to get into individualized career services and training services, of explaining the differences and what all is included in each of those. I think we get questions a lot when people see these lists that aren't familiar with WorkSource Georgia. They're surprised to see the level of services that can be offered with WIOA. And so I think this is helpful for your board as you think strategically of what you want to make a priority, for them to understand everything that's at your disposal and everything that you can fund as a board from a service delivery standpoint. Obviously, it's important to begin to explain to them how ITAs work. That has been and will continue to be the crux of what we do, even with the renewed focus under WIOA on business services. We know ITAs are essential, and if someone can't understand the concept, the basic concept of individual training accounts, it's going to be hard for them to really understand how our system works. And I think that then leads to what's probably going to be a robust discussion on the ETPL process. That I think we probably get more questions about than anything else at the state level, at least, and explaining the dynamic of how the local and state cooperation works on the ETPL process. So I think this would be a good time at that, to discuss that issue as well, because there probably either may be training providers or your board members may know people who are, and they're going to know how they can, become eligible for that to be able to provide services. This is one from Fulton that's just showing an example of some of their training providers, which again I thought was helpful. If someone's new to the network, they may not understand the dynamic between how it can be a public technical college that's part of TCSG, or it can be a private for-profit training. So I think it's good to show how, we are not respecters of persons. Each individual in business has freedom of choice, but we do have a system in place that regulates who does and doesn't, who can and can't provide services, and that's just for the protection of our participants to ensure that anyone we're paying for is providing quality training services.
I've forgotten about this.
I think we had somebody needs to mute. We can hear some background noise. This has been going on where it's just talking about growth and in-demand occupation. So I think this was a good one from Fulton that's just showing, we can serve an array of occupations. You'll see in a minute when Fulton identifies the industries that they have targeted, but I think it's important to show them your local in-demand occupations list so that they can understand what we're pushing people toward, and that will also hopefully save you from having board members that are trying to get you to spend time and money on an occupation that you may know is not in demand, that's not a good use of your time, or it's not a good use of your local resources in terms of training someone. So having that discussion about how your in-demand occupations list works is important. This is another one that I thought was important, where Fulton talks about some of their local policies around limitations around ITAs and the caps they have for training costs. I think this is going to be a good time for you, after you describe how ITAs work, to really explain any local policy you have that may limit your total cost per participant caps that you may have, or any other caps you have that limit what you can and can't spend. That may lead to a conversation with your board of wanting to consider or reconsider that, but it gives you a chance to then fill them in on why that policy was put in place in the first place, and explain that if a need arises in the future for that change, what that process looks like and how you can do it. Another one that's just kind of talking about how it's determined when a customer will receive training services. So again, trying to explain further the eligibility piece of really pulling that out and determining when will you shift from those individualized services to training services. The next, I think, is when it comes down to youth. This is one I think, as we know, youth can be the most challenging at times. So I think you're probably going to have to spend a lot of time really doing a deep dive on how our youth services work, talking about the limitations from a funding standpoint, and talking about how, the priority of how you set from in-school, out-of-school, and the challenge that you have now with trying to find effective in-school youth programs. We're hopeful that the waiver will be approved soon, and you guys will have that expanded capacity for the 50-50 split. But in the meantime, until we get that approval, hoping we do, but I think it's good to inform them of how it sits right now under the law. What you'll see here, this is just talking about the 20% having to be on work experience. I think it's a good time at that point to explain what work experience is and how it works. And so I know that's one that's probably the least understood, or I think sometimes least utilized for that reason. So it's a good, good chance for you to explain to your board how that's supposed to work and to help them begin to brainstorm ways you can utilize it better. This was one from ARC that I thought was pretty neat. If you have the data that you can readily put in a graphic like this that's showing kind of how their participant levels have changed over time. And I think it's important to have this conversation, because if you have this, you would think on the surface someone may just see these numbers and think that means you're doing something wrong if you're serving less people. But as we know in our network, when you've been in it, it's all, it correlates completely to the economy. So this is when I think you can have the conversation around, we expect when the economy is better that our participants are going to go down because you have less people looking for work and training. Consequently, that's when you can begin to explain why our funding levels go down based on the economy, because as you saw with those formulas for allocation, those are tied to other levers that are representative of the quality and the health of the economy. As the economy gets better, our money's going to go down, and then also it's going to be correlated with a decrease in participant levels. So I think this is a good slide to explain that. This is again just showing their enrollment numbers over time, showing how that has changed of coming out of the recession in 2012 when they were serving, had upwards of 60,000 customer visits, and then now in 2018 just over 30,000. I think it's good to begin to kind of show that, compare that level, and have a discussion. Because if you look at, while there's a drastic drop in the number of customer visits from 2012 to 2018, you don't have as dramatic of a change in the actual number of adults enrolled between 2012 and 2018. And so that may be a good time for you to explain what are the factors that could lead to someone who may visit one of our sites but may not actually end up being enrolled, and why that could occur. We know there are many factors that can influence that, so it may be a good chance to have that discussion at that point. This is just talking about how you can begin to explain how our supportive services works. This is, again, I think an area where we get a lot of questions at the state level, where people will hear anecdotal evidence of this, but they don't understand how our supportive services work. So I think this is a good chance for you to explain how we can offer those support services to someone in need of those services while they go through training, to ensure that they actually have the support they need to complete the training that we're providing them. This is then beginning to talk about performance and how the performance works and how your accountability structure works. This is obviously going to be very important, because as you know, this is something that both we at the state and the feds look at, and so it's important for your board members to understand how that accountability is going to fall on them and what they should be looking for as you kind of check throughout the year on your performance standards, to ensure you're going to be where you need to be once it comes time for us to pull that data. So this is just an explanation of how that performance negotiation process works, how you negotiate with us annually, and how we negotiate with USDOL. And so I think this is a good explanation so they can understand how that comes to be. so that when you do show them your performance numbers and levels, they'll understand how you got to those numbers. And this is then just a deep dive into what are those performance and accountability levers that we pull, talking about employment rate after second and fourth quarter, earnings, measurable skills gains. This is just explaining each of those so that your board members can understand what you're being measured by. This is just ARC, where they showed an example of their PY18 when this was pulled to date of where they sat in terms of performance. I think this will be good, whether you can brag and show them, hey, we're doing great, we're exceeding all of our goals that we've negotiated, or it may be where you can say, listen, we're exceeding in all but 2 areas. One that we noticed that is probably the weakest statewide will be the youth credential attainment, and so then that can lead to a good discussion of, it doesn't mean that we're not performing well here, but we have problems A, B, and C that lead to this. As a board, how can you help us find ways to get around the issues we're having with this one piece of performance? And so I think this would be good to show you where you sit. Maybe you can even show some historical data. So if you had, say, 4 years ago where you were only meeting or exceeding half of these, but now you're exceeding them all, that can then lead to a good conversation of what led to that, so that you can encourage them to support you and continue in that good behavior. So then this is just getting into customer flow and explaining the intake and assessment process, then being determined for individualized and training services. I think it's good just for them to understand when someone walks in your door at a one-stop or an affiliate site, what does that process look like for a customer, so that they can begin to understand. If they refer someone, once they hear about it and they get excited and they send a friend or a niece or a nephew to come in, they can know what to expect, and that can then lead to the conversation of what that exit and follow-up process looks like. This is kind of talking about, Fulton giving some examples of, we get asked a lot, well, how do people know you're out there? How do you spread the word? And so this is just showing some of those most common examples of how you can, through word of mouth, partner referral, employee referral, and as we are working here at the state level on a more coordinated marketing effort, these are efforts that you can point toward things like Great Georgia Jobs and others, where you can show them those videos and how we are trying to invest with you guys to help get the word out there, because as we know, we're often called the best kept secret, and so they're probably going to want to know, how do we help tell people and what are we doing? Will then also lead to a conversation on the parameters we do have and the restrictions around marketing with our funds. I'm sure they're going to want you to do lots of great things that are flashy and shiny, and as you know, you can't do a lot of those things, and so this could then be a good chance for you to have that discussion of what you can and can't do with the funds that you're allocated from a marketing and an advertisement standpoint. Again, this is, I think, just getting into a few deeper dives into an aspect of our service. So talking about priority of service from an adult standpoint, what that looks like. As we know, when the economy is good and you have enough funds to serve everyone, even though you always operate from a priority of service standpoint, it doesn't become as much of an issue because you're not having to turn people away. But I think it's important for them to be well versed in this, because as you know, at any point in time, the economy could turn and you could have a lot more people coming in your doors. And at that point, that's when priority of service really becomes a priority, and you'll have to help them understand why you may have to serve some individuals before you serve others. And that then leads to the conversation around veterans and veterans priority of service. I know we've had this conversation with a few local areas in the past 6 months of making sure that this is something that's being utilized properly now. You have several areas that have a large military presence, and so I think it's important for your board to understand how the Veterans Priority of Service policy works and what that means for your service delivery. This was then a slide Fulton did that's trying to begin to explain the WIOA business services side. This is an overview, and they get into a deep dive later on, but I think it's a good chance for you to begin to explain, especially since you're going to have a lot of business owners and business leaders sitting on your board. They're likely going to know is, what can you do for business? How can you help serve employers in our region? And this is where you can begin to have that conversation of what that looks like, how that relates back to ITAs, and how you can combine your efforts in the two through something like registered apprenticeships to really have a bigger bang for your buck. Again, this is just beginning to get into topics like work-based learning, explaining how that works, and explaining even greater the collaboration that's required at the federal and state levels around things like work-based learning. So this mentions how we now, under the new Perkins reauthorization, have an official definition for work-based learning. We've never had that defined in federal statute before, and now we do. And so as we know, that will bleed over into our world as well. And so it gives you something to point to as we try to build out work-based learning strategies as a board, especially when we talk about things later on like sector partnerships and others. As we know, this is a critical piece of that. Showing some examples of exactly how work-based learning within the WIOA network works and what that looks like. The next is then beginning to explain to them how the local leadership structure works. So starting with your LEO board, I think this is probably even within our network, folks that have been in it for a long time, they probably know the least about the LEO board. They're very familiar with the local workforce development board, but we get a lot of questions about this shadow organization, the LEO board. People think there's a lot more to that than there is, but I think it's a good chance for you to explain who the LEO board is comprised of, what their responsibility is, and how they then compare and contrast with your local workforce development board. And so I think this is a worthy discussion for them to understand how that authority structure flows, because this is one we get a lot of questions on. There's a lot of confusion around the LEO board, which then obviously bleeds into the local workforce development board. So explaining the membership makeup of the board, who should and has to be represented on your board, and who are some other maybe not mandated, but then partners that you've built in. So this, again, I think is one where you can really tailor this to your local needs, and what you're dealing with. If you have partners that you've added to your board, this is when you can explain why, and I guess take feedback if they have suggestions for others that could be added. But I think it's important to have the discussion of what your mandatory elements are, so that if you add non-business representatives, for them to understand, for you to maintain that business majority, anytime you add a non-business, you're going to have to add a business to maintain that 51%, so that they can understand that you don't get a board that's 75 people. This has just been showing from ARCs where they're pulled from their bylaws to show the purpose of the board, what is the vision and mission of the board as it, established by your bylaws, so that they can understand what their responsibilities are. And this takes a little bit deeper dive into that to show a graphic depiction of what are we here to do as a board, what are our required responsibilities that we have to do by statute, but then overall, what are the visionary responsibilities we have in our area, in our region, to try to build a stronger workforce network and system for our citizens and employers. And so this begins to try to show those, both the required and kind of the more theoretical responsibilities that your board members have. And this, again, this is just where ARC is talking about what their member expectations are, things like attending certain meetings, being part of a committee, making sure you notify the chair when they're not able to attend. I think it's important, we have had issues in the past where we've had directors that have complained because they may, even a partner that's required to be on their board, but participation is lacking, for lack of a better word. And so I think it's important, especially for someone who chooses and wants to be actively involved in your board and you appoint them, I think it's important for them to understand what the expectations are, to understand the amount of money they're overseeing and what that responsibility is, and for them to understand that even as staff to the board, there's only so much you can do oftentimes without their approval, and if you can't get a quorum at a board meeting to get something approved, that can really hold up progress for your entire region. And so I think it's important for them to understand the level of responsibility that they have as a board member and what they are expected to do as a member. Bylaws, and so this is one where I think it's a good chance for you to make sure that all of your board members have a copy of and have read your bylaws. I think it's essential. If you look at even the best that we have, none of them are super long, so it's not like it's going to be a week-long read. You're talking about 7 to 10 pages at most. But I think it's important because you'll see all of these things are what are required and what we check for in your bylaws. And so it's good for them to understand why you have bylaws. It's not just something that we do to check a box, but it will really help them be kind of their introductory document of what they're getting into, what the board is composed of, and what it's going to look like for their duties and their terms. So I think it's important for you to begin to stress the bylaws piece and make sure they're familiar with it, especially your chair. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about Robert's rules, but it's definitely important to ensure your chair is very well versed in the bylaws of your board so they can conduct your meetings and proceedings accordingly. Another graphic that we've all seen a million times that's just trying to show the statewide governance of WIOA. This is what I was saying, you're going to see a little bit of repetition, and I think that's good. I think it's good for them to kind of get this ingrained, to understand that dynamic between USDOL, us here at the state office, along with the state board, and how that has been mirrored at the local level. It's important for that. This is a good graphic, I think, that even takes the graphic we're familiar with, and Brett and them even added some additional color to clarify exactly how the governance and funding flows based on the color of the arrow. So I think this is a good one to use. Again, this one's in talking about the additional piece of the accountability. So talking about our statewide monitoring process. It could be a good chance also talking about the potential for an occasional USDOL monitoring. As Brett and Coastal and others can speak to what that process looks like, how it differs from what we do in a statewide monitoring, so that you can always be prepared. We don't know when those come, at least for the statewide one, to expect them annually, but it is good to always be prepared so you're not caught off guard to have the feds in your office for a week at any given point. Then this is talking about the fiscal side of our accountability structure, how it works in terms of how you can receive your funds on a reimbursement basis based on when you can invoice us for the services that you provided. And so I think it's good to have the discussions around FSRs and how that works from the fiscal agent responsibility, along with our office here at the state as the fiscal administrator for the state of Georgia for WIOA, excuse me. It's good to talk about your quarterly reporting requirements, and so they can understand from a finance standpoint what you must do in regards to the state and the feds to stay in compliance, and then how that relationship between the two of us works. This is a good one. It's just showing kind of the timeline. I think it's good for people to understand. I'm sure as directors, you know the struggle you have when people think you have more money than you do, or when you haven't gotten your total annual allocation yet. So it's good to explain to them how many funds come and at what point of the year, so they can understand how that works. And then to begin to have the discussion from a budgeting standpoint of when you talk about things like 80% obligation, when that falls, what year you're operating in, and which funds you need to make a priority so that you can get those out the door before they expire. This is the time you can have those discussions. And that's what you'll see here. Again, these are just talking about those timelines, explaining your 2-year grant period, and the difference between a fiscal year and a program year, and beginning to let them understand how this works. So when you're throwing out things like FY18, PY17, that's not Greek to them. They understand what you're talking about. This is what we're talking about, again, on the budgeting side. It's a good one to begin to explain some of the requirements you have from an out-of-school, in-school youth standpoint, a work experience standpoint, and the same around incumbent worker training, the cap you have on the 30% of your adult dislocated worker funds. Again, I think it's good to have these discussions. So if there's a time when you as staff to the board or as director have to say, no, we can't do that, they will understand why, and you don't get pushback on something that you have no flexibility on yourself. This is then just getting into, I thought Fulton had a good slide that's showing what are allowable costs. I think you spend probably most of your time as staff to a board explaining what you can and can't do, and so it could be good to explain to your board up front, these are some of the things we can do, and then the next one is some of the things we can't do. What are some of the most commonly cited unallowable costs that we find when we do monitoring? And so this will help you explain, listen, we can't do these things, or these are issues we've had in the past. We want to make sure we avoid these roadblocks. And explaining if something happens and you do have an unallowable cost, how that then has to be paid back out of local funds from your fiscal agent. And that's not something anyone wants to do, and so I think it's a good conversation to have that dynamic and explain that dynamic. And then this is just when you're talking about the budget, when you're trying to help your board go through the budgeting process with you, some questions for them to consider as you begin to look at those budgeting and how you can set priorities for your budget for current year or future year funds. This, I think, was one where Brett went through, and obviously this is going to have to be tailored locally and how, depending on the system you use for budgeting and everything else, but where they explain to them, when we give you a printout of the budget, this is how you read that budget. And I think that is important. And it's something I think, we have to do at the state level when we show our state board financial reports, because if you just throw someone, a piece of paper with a lot of numbers, it means nothing to them. When they see percentages of expended and percentages obligated, if they're not familiar with all of these concepts, it's going to make zero sense to them. So I think it's important for you to be able to very explicitly point out, when you see this number and this percentage, this is good. When you see this, this is bad. And so that they can then give you honest feedback. Otherwise, they may just see numbers and be speaking out of ignorance and think you have a lot more money than you have, or you're in a much worse situation than you are. So I think it's good to explain to them, when you give them a budget printout, how they can read it. And that's what they were showing here, of explaining PY18, when you're looking at percent you've expended, how that works. And the same with obligations. If you don't have it obligated and you're coming up on a deadline where you need to have 80% obligation by that deadline, explaining, listen, this is where we need to focus. We've got to, from a delivery standpoint, make sure we can come up with something that we can obligate these funds, or else they're going to be sent back to the state. The next thing, and I think before we move into this, any questions, feel free to jump in on any of that. The next one's just when they're talking about higher level, partnerships and concepts that each region's involved in. But I think that's the crux of the basics of how you operate, how the board operates, and the service delivery. And then the next, as you can see, when they began, Brett was explaining to them as Metro Atlanta, when we talk about sector partnerships, he gave them a good overview of the work that's being done on a regional level through the sector partnership work. And I think this is important for your board members to know, one, so they can see the value in what you're doing. This is very important, and it's something we're investing a lot in at the state level. And it's something that I think your board members will enjoy. I think this is going to be more of the type of work that they want to be a part of, not that the others not, but at the same time, you're also going to have to keep them reined in so they can understand what you are trying to accomplish as a partnership, what are the, the very specific goals you're focused on, and what you necessarily probably can't take on. And so Brett just kind of went through and explained to them the priorities of the Metro Atlanta sector partnership work, what they're doing, what industries they've identified, and what they're trying to accomplish from a coordination standpoint, what they found. You can see kind of the brand they've developed for the Metro Atlanta sector industry partnerships, the how to make careers that they've identified and what they're focusing on. Same here, continuing that of showing healthcare IT. And so I think that will be good. You can obviously go into as little or as much detail you want to on that work, and depending on what you're doing as a region and where it sits. You can talk about what you did with the round 1 grants. You can talk about your plans for round 2, but I think it's good for them to be involved in that so they can, again, continue to brag. The next thing they did is they actually had me come in at their lunch and kind of give the state perspective. So again, you'll see a little bit of where it was repetition of what they had done, but it was kind of stressing that importance of how the relationship works between the state and local offices. Gave a chance for you don't have to bring someone in, but I'm saying you can explain how the state board works and how that correlates with the local board that you went through, how the relationship is similar and how the structure is similar and different, showing that we mirror the same representation that we have to have on the state board. They're appointed by the governor, and explaining kind of our committee structure. If you want to use this to mimic for yourself, you can do that for your local boards, but I think it's a good chance for them to understand how that works and how that oversight relationship is structured from USCOL and down. Showing where they fit into the overall picture as a state, from regions and areas. And then this next one I thought was good. They got into actual service delivery. So they talked about the priorities they have from an industry standpoint in Fulton County, what that looks like, some of their roles, and how this I thought was good because I think people need to understand at the local level what your service delivery and what those roles are for each person. This is something that I know outside partners get confused because this is different for every area, but I think it's important. You may not have to explain how it works in all of the 18 other areas, but I think it's important for them to understand if you do contract out to someone like ResCare or Goodwill, that they understand who that person is, what oversight you have over them, but then what also autonomy they have in the way they deliver those services. This was in an org chart they showed to explain how their local workforce officer division works. I think it's good for your board to be familiar with you and your local staff. They know who to call on when they have certain questions or requests. So I think it's good for you to put this in as well and explain the organization that you're a part of, how you fit into that organization, and then how your team is structured. So these, I won't go into a lot of detail on these, but I thought these were some really good graphics that they developed to just kind of explain again, further explain the dynamic within the system at the local level, how that works, what they're trying to accomplish, what are some of the main goals and priorities that they're setting. Again, I thought just some creative ways for you to have additional conversation, add some additional color to how this works, how you partner with your employers, and what that looks like from the sector partnership standpoint to then what you're doing on a daily basis with your local area. This, I thought, was a good conversation to have where they're trying to explain. We get the question of, well, how does this relate to our region or area's economic development efforts? So I think, they did a good job of explaining from the Development Authority to Select Fulton to then WorkSource Fulton of how those work and how you partner together to serve a common goal overall, but also how you differ and how you're going to have some motivations that may be different from your economic development arms, but how you can work together to kind of overcome those. Any questions on those before we dive into some of the more sunshine provisions, Robert's Rule stuff? One thing I will give this chance so you can get a break from hearing me. We'll start with Keith and then we'll jump in. Actually, we'll do Brett since we just kind of dissected your stuff. Brett, if you're still on and you don't mind, I'd love to hear your thoughts now looking back on your training of were you pleased, were you not, what you thought, and what were some of your lessons and takeaways from that?
Yeah, well, I'll start with, for those of you that may have seen it, a lot of that comes from a presentation Mary Margaret's provided to the Association of Regional Commissions. And so I actually took out a lot of the stuff she had about the relationship to the RC and RC board. And so if you want that's back in that presentation that we can give out. As far as our board, I think the key that we were trying to get across to them was showing the board members that they're not just there to rubber stamp everything and to show where they have sort of the decision points and empowering them to make those. So we talked a lot about, here's what the federal law says, but really diving down to say, here's where, we have the ability as a local board to make this policy decision. So like with ITA caps, with priority of service, with strategic populations, here's areas where we can define this through policy to direct where we're taking things. What's not on here, and that, I think Keith will talk about it probably, but I think Keith does a really good job of is, I wish we had more time to get into strategic planning, that here's the basis, and really letting them drill down into committee work and into setting that like vision and mission for the workforce board so that they can take this basis and then develop it into, well, here's where we want to put our efforts. You know, we have limited resources. What's the focus on where we want to strategize and put that around? If I had it to do again, I would probably allocate more time towards that planning aspect as opposed to, you know, reading through the basics of the law.
Perfect. Excellent. Any questions for Brett? Okay, great. Well, next, Keith, I want you to talk about looking at this and knowing what you do. Wanted you to kind of compare and contrast of how you may do things differently. There's information that I didn't include in this that you guys include, or like Brett touched on, if you have kind of a strategic visioning or planning session that you build in, and even how you structure your board retreat. Is it a single day, multiple days? Explain kind of what you do in your area and how it may look differently from this.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. What we do is we do a board retreat once a year. We come in on, the board members come in, or the planning committee comes in on Thursday afternoon. We have all of our meetings set up and scheduled. We just review it. One of the things that we do is we break up, we have different committees for everything. And then what we do is we bring the committee chairs in, and they actually moderate their training session. We have a staff at the table available, but they're only there for input and for any guidance that they may need. And we come in, they come in on Thursday, we review the agenda for the weekend, we go to dinner, we discuss everything that we want to try to accomplish during that. And each year we change it. Last year, I think it was last year, we defined all of our mission statements for our committees, what their roles were, what their responsibilities were. We selected our chair and vice chair, and then we came back together and we did as a whole board based on all the committees' mission statement, we designed the board's mission statement. And that way they know what our overall view for the region is, based that we are a rural area, we have limited funds. So what is going to be our focal point of this board? Where do we want to really focus our energy and our time? And then on Friday night, Friday afternoon, the rest of the boards come in. We have a new members orientation that starts at 3 o'clock and it runs for about 2 to 3 hours. And they get a notebook, they get a breakdown of how everything is laid out, how the money flows. They get a copy of all the one stops, where they're at, the information of how to get to them. They get a list of the board members. The great thing about that is we actually have a board member that does that training. We have staff in the room, but most of our training to our board members are done by the board members that's been on the board for years. Then one of the things that we've incorporated is we have set up a mentoring program. So any new person coming on the board is whatever a committee they're assigned to, either the chair or the vice chair sits with them at the board meeting. So if there's anything that they're not sure about, they can ask one of them without having to, you know, in a better term, feel stupid about asking it in an open meeting. Yeah. They've got them right there to talk to. And then Friday night we have a dinner, and one of the things that I always like to do is I always like to try to bring participants in, so that they can actually put a face with these numbers that they see on the sheets. And we try to bring in a dislocated worker, an adult, and a youth, and let them tell them about their process through the system, where they started and where they're at now. And that just gives them a feel of the people that we're actually working with, and that helps them to really understand the system more. Then Saturday morning, and I usually have somebody from the state there, you know, Friday night to give the state's perspective. I just want my board to understand that, yeah, here's where the state's going, here's where we're trying to go. We're just not out in left field running around chasing pink elephants. And then Saturday morning, we come back in, have breakfast. We have another speaker then that will talk about something else. And then we go into the planning session. We have a session, and whatever's on the agenda, and I'll use last year's. Last year's, we're setting up the mission statement. So the committees met, they had their old mission statement, they revised them to where they think they needed to be, and then at the end of that session, they turned them in. The staff then took those and started typing them up to give everybody a copy Sunday morning at the board meeting. And then after the break, they came back as a group. And again, we have one of the board members, which we're very fortunate to have our economic development person, Ryan Waldorf, who is real involved with our board, to lead the session on revamping the mission statement of the board based on all the mission statements of the committees. And so what we try to do is get buy-in from them. First of all, for them to understand what the system does and how it works. And two, that they had a part in setting it up. A lot of times when people have input, even if you take their input or not, if they feel like they're part of the system, they're a lot more receptive to changes and all within it. So therefore, when we go through that, then we redid the mission statement. We had lunch, we had another speaker, and then we continued on if needed to. If not, it gave a networking time for our board members to get together. And then Sunday morning we come back, we had breakfast, a speaker, and then we had our board meeting, and then we adjourned. So their weekend is pretty packed, but the thing about it is it gives them time together as board members to talk. And that's really what I'm interested in, is the continuity between our board members. Because, yes. One of the things that we look at is our committees, anything that we bring before the board goes to the committee, and the committee looks at it, they review it, we give them all the information, then it's approved in the committee, then the committee brings it to the full board for a vote. So if they know each other and they trust each other, it runs smoothly. And that's pretty much how ours operates. But our board retreat is really to spend time with board members, because at a board meeting on a normal day, we get there at 10:30, we have our board meeting, an hour, we eat lunch, and they're gone. You don't get to build time with the board members. You don't get that time to sit down and talk to them and answer any questions that they have. And at the retreat, that gives us an opportunity, since we're there for about 2.5 days together, it gives us an opportunity to really sit down and talk to board members, and it gives them the opportunity to ask questions that they're uncomfortable asking in just a regular meeting.
Well, that's good stuff, Steve. I appreciate that. Feedback themselves. But I think it's good. I think you're exactly right. I think what's so important about the structure that you use is that relationship building piece. I think one thing we have learned over the last 5 years with our state board is as we introduced the concept of kind of having those traveling meetings for our board meetings, that kind of 2-day structure gave them a great chance, as you said, to kind of get to know each other and build relationships among the board members. And that is essential. And so I think what you do is effective in that regard, and hope others can learn from that. Because you're right, you're only going to learn so much of each other in a 1 or 2 hour board meeting occasionally, but that gives them a chance to kind of to roll their sleeves up, let their hair down, and be a little more honest with each other. And I think that's a smart approach. Are there any questions for Keith? Cool. Well, Keith and Brett, I appreciate both of you guys. We'll push on to the next so I can get you out of here. The next 2 things we're going to talk about, the first one is just kind of sunshine provisions and open meeting requirements. So again, I will go through these. I'm not going to do a deep dive myself, because I know most of you are likely familiar with these. But if you're not, we'll send this out. I do encourage you to review it so you can make sure that as you operate your local board, that you're doing it in compliance with state law and federal regulations. So the first one is just kind of talking about some of the sunshine provisions within WIOA itself, explaining what are some of the requirements that are expected of a local board from WIOA standpoint. in terms of when you submit your local plan, what that process should look like, in terms of your membership, and designating your one-stop operator. So it's kind of talking about how all of that needs to be done in an open manner so that partners within your region or even without, outside your region can be privy to that and have input when and where wanted. So I think it's important for that, especially when it comes to the board, so they can understand their responsibility. So when you're having to, approve a plan and put it up for a 30-day comment or whatever else, they can understand why a timeline can be so essential, because if you delay that vote, that delays the whole, timeline for you, and that can keep you from getting something passed. I know for some of the local areas where you're an administrative entity or your fiscal agent may be one of the larger cities in your region, this is something that can be a challenge, because, if you're going through a city that it takes 2 months to get anything approved through the city council if needed, that can really delay things. And so if you have members of those organizations on your board, I think it's important for them to understand this process, thoroughly, so they can understand their responsibility in their other roles, be it city councilman or county chairman, whatever. They can understand how responsible and responsive they need to be to help make sure that you can get the things done that you need to meet deadlines from us or from the feds. Again, this is just talking about some of those sunshine regulatory language of ensuring that that's done in a way you're conducting your business in an open manner. This is all coming from WIOA. Again, nothing new, but feel free to review these so you can, one, make sure you're aware of it, and then make sure your board members are thoroughly trained on what those requirements are. The next is then talking about Georgia open meeting requirements and how that contrasts or, complements or supplements what we have under WIOA. So then this is just making sure that you're in compliance with all the Georgia Open Meetings Act. So all of your local workforce development board meetings are to be conducted in accordance with those Georgia Open Meeting Act requirements. So it's just understanding that and understanding the role that plays and how that adds additional responsibilities. These are just explaining, so based on Georgia Open Meetings, it's explaining what classifies a meeting. So understanding, when you have a quorum of your board members together, that is what classifies a meeting, but understanding what doesn't is the next slide. So if you do have an informal, tour of a plan or something else, this helps you know by statute, no CGA, what is and isn't a meeting, so you understand where do those meeting requirements fall and when do they not. And I think that's an important clarification so that you don't step into something where you thought what you were doing wasn't technically a meeting because you didn't call it that, but by statute, you technically were conducting a meeting of your board. So it's important to understand that dynamic. Again, this is when I was going to, Shamika's in here, so we're talking about the public notice you must make around your meetings, as we know, at least a week in advance. So these are talking about that. I wanted Shamika to be in here. I was having trouble getting our website to load, but was just going to get her to kind of speak to what we do at the state level where we post it, and then maybe some best practices of what you can do at the local level of where you can satisfy these requirements electronically and where they can be posted. Shamika?
Yeah, so we spent some time recently redeveloping the State Workforce Development Board page on TCSG.edu. So the way that you can access it, since you guys can't see it on the screen, TCSG.edu/worksource, and about the fifth box in the middle of the screen, it says State Workforce Development Board. Once you click on that box, the first thing you're going to see is a video recap from the last meeting. So we try to take pictures, shoot a little video, and put something together just to show what happened. But I think the real meat of this website is the information that we have organized on it. So there are tabs, everything from upcoming meetings, so you can see a schedule of meetings for the year. We archive meeting minutes dating, I think, back to 2014 is on the website right now. There's an accommodations tab, which is really cool for the board because there you'll find everything from hotel reservations, the agenda for the upcoming meeting, and then on the additional information tab, that's where your electronic documents can live. So you guys know that in your meetings, you might pass out these big packets or folders full of paperwork, and that's good, so that the board can review in real time as the discussions are being made. But if you want to go more electronic, you can upload those documents there and allow them to access them from their phones or online, that is. And you can even put a security measure where you give out one password at the beginning of the meeting so everyone in the room can access those documents. There are tons of ways to do that. They can also RSVP online when needed, and then also their information about how to access other information related to that in future meetings. Now, we have a membership roster on our website as one of the tabs, and it includes a headshot and bio for each board board member. And the reason why we wanted to do that was to kind of increase the brand equity of our State Workforce Development Board. A lot of people didn't even know who sits on our board because the membership changed a bit when we moved to TCSG. So just kind of understanding what representation, like Jamie talked about, the different pieces that make up, you know, the board, what representation is comprised of our board is important. So we have that on our website. We also have a way that, you know, people can contact our board. We created a dedicated email address. It's swdb@tcsg.edu. And anyone that emails that, it'll go to the person here. It used to be Manoa, but it'll go to the person here that kind of coordinates with the board. So if you have a question for Wendell and you're just from the general public, you email that and then Manoa can filter that in. So it's not that our board members are getting bombarded, but we're able to see kind of what the communication externally looks like. There's a contact form just if you want to drop in general questions, but overall we wanted to organize this page just in a way that is user-friendly for the board during the actual meetings and also a communication tool for those that want to interact with the board externally. So that's kind of what we were able to accomplish with this page.
Excellent. Any questions for Shamika? One thing that I think is important about the page that they've developed is it serves two purposes. One is it helps you satisfy your open meeting requirements, which is essential, but it also creates an ability to make planning your board meetings and getting information to your board members more convenient for them. And so I think both are important. I think it's good for your board members to be able to be as informed as they want to prior to your meetings. And so I would encourage you, if you need assistance with that or you have, you want additional help with setting that up, feel free to reach out to Shamika and her team. They're going to be offering some assistance in the coming months anyway of revamping websites if there's interest there, but we wanted to at least let this know. But I think the important thing to take away from this and what you see on the screen now, making sure you make you post the notice of your meeting at least a week in advance, making sure you make an agenda available as soon as reasonably possible beforehand. That doesn't have to meet that 2-week requirement, but just as soon as you can. And then just because if you post an agenda online and you may have something that's added last minute, it doesn't mean that you can't act on that. It just means that was added last minute and you couldn't help that. But if you know you're planning to consider something and you have that by the time you post the agenda, you want to make sure you have all that on there. Then you're talking about meeting minutes and a summary. This just shows what your responsibility is from a statute standpoint, when you need to post that or when you need to make it available. A summary needs to be available within 2 business days of your adjournment. The law, our interpretation of that is it doesn't mandate that be posted within 2 business days, but if someone were to request it, you should be able to provide them with some type of summary. It may not be the formal minutes. It could just be, the agenda with notes. But again, that technically needs to be available if someone wants it, and then you do need to post the official minutes once they're approved at your next meeting. This is then just looking at how the local elected, the CLEO board, how that works and how that fits into WIOA, and then the next one is talking about how that then fits into Georgia open meeting requirements. Any questions on Sunshine Law's open meeting requirements? All right, we're rolling on through. The next, again, I won't go through all of this in great detail, but this is just the basics of Robert's Rules. As you know, we do require the use of Robert Rules in your meetings by state rule, so it's important, I think, to do a training and an overview with your board members of how do the official Robert's Rules of Orders work and how they're going to conduct your business. Explain to them the importance of that. This is not just a formality that we want for the sake of formality. It does allow you to promote and maintain a harmonious environment for debate and discussion so that everyone's voice is heard and so you don't have chaos if you do have issues that tend to be contentious. Hopefully a majority of the things you take up, you will never have to need necessarily Robert's Rules for them to function, but I still think it's good to operate in that capacity so that you're operating in an official way and so that as you document that in your minutes, that's reflected. It's important for your board chair to understand the responsibility that they hold in conducting a meeting. They preside and maintain total order over a meeting, and so it's essential that they be completely well-versed in your bylaws and in Robert's Rules of Order, and so that they can make sure they understand the procedures that they're responsible for as the chairman of your board. They decide all the questions of the board. They should be working with you in developing the agenda. They're the ones that are going to announce all the business that go before your board, and they are the ones during board meetings that are responsible for recognizing members for discussions and questions. We've talked about bylaws, so we don't need to go through this again, but making sure they understand from a local standpoint your bylaws are legally binding. We will use those as reference if we have a finding where you're not acting in compliance with your own bylaws, so they do carry weight. Understanding the importance of your agenda, why you have an agenda, but understanding while it does direct the flow of business during a meeting, if there's something that needs to be changed on the fly, you're able to do that at the discretion of the chair. So letting them understand the importance of the agenda, why you have it, but also what flexibility you have there. I think it's important for them to fully understand the official definition of quorum and how that works, of understanding that it's half plus one, not just half. So if you're an 8-person board, that means you need to have 5 people to have quorum, not just 4. And you have to have a quorum for any official business. The only thing you can technically vote on without quorum is to adjourn. And so I think, whenever you have, items that are going to be action items at a board, it's important for your board to understand the role they play in you achieving a quorum. If they're not there, you cannot get work done. Now, I think the additional clarification with quorum is understanding once you have quorum at a meeting, once you vote on items, it is just the majority of that quorum present. You do not have to have a majority of your overall board. So again, if you're an 8-person board, you have 5 people in attendance. When you're voting, it's just a majority of those 5 people. It's not a majority of the 8 that you have to have for a vote. I know that can be confusing to some people, but the importance is quorum, and then it's a majority. It's important for the chairperson to always recognize the presence or absence of a quorum for the minute note takers. As someone, that's what we'll talk about in a minute. When we talk about calling the question and others, this is just giving examples of how you call the question. And you'll see a lot of this will seem redundant and really formal in that when someone calls something, it requires you to recognize the board member that has done so repeatedly. That seems unnecessary, especially if you know everyone in the room, but for the sake of someone who may be note-taking for your minutes for your meeting, who may be recording those, they may not know every one of your board members' voices by heart, and so it's important for them to know when someone says, so moved or I second, to make sure it's recognized by name who did that, so you have that documented, so when they're going back and making those meeting minutes, they can document properly who was in support or, opposition of that. Oftentimes on things like your agenda and meeting minutes, it will never be a point of contention, but if you do have an issue where it is contentious and you have a close vote, you want to make sure that you are documenting properly in the minutes who did support it and who didn't, because you could upset someone if you officially say they seconded a motion that they did not actually. So that's when it is important. This is just kind of the formality of how you call the question, how the chair recognizes someone, and how you can only consider one primary question at a time. So when you're considering an issue before a board, once that question has been called or has been brought to the table for discussion, you cannot move on to another primary issue until you have addressed that initial one in some way. That can be voting it up or down, tabling it, sending it back to committee, whatever it may be, but no other official business can be considered. And that includes something like approving the minutes. If you bring the minutes up to be approved and there's discussion, until you approve that and you have the vote you need to approve it, you cannot move on to any other item on that agenda. So it's important for people to understand how the flow of business must work to be in compliance with Robert's rules. This is then just explaining how you call the question, how a member addresses the chair to then be recognized. Again, technically in a board meeting, I know it sounds dictatorial, but no one technically has authority to speak except for the chair unless they are recognized. And so they do ask to be recognized to make a motion, and that's when the chair recognizes them. And they'll move, I move that we X, I move that we approve the previous meeting's minutes. Another member doesn't have to be recognized, they can just say, I second the motion, and then the rest follows. And this is then explaining how the chair then calls that question. And this is when I was saying, it seems repetitious, but this is when some member has moved, I move that we approve the previous meeting's minutes, then the chair should say there's a motion on the floor by, Jane Doe that we approve the, previous meeting minutes, and we have a second. Is there any discussion? At that point, the floor is open for debate. Again, the chair is essential in presiding over that debate to make sure everything stays in compliance and stays civil, and to make sure that you're only discussing things that are relevant or germane to the motion. At the point of that, there's no discussion, you call for the vote. Chair is going to oversee the vote if you're doing a voice vote, and in their opinion, they'll choose whether the ayes or the nays win. If there's ever a 2/3 vote, or if someone asks for a counting vote, I think you always, give that. You can have them stand, raise their hand, but anytime you do a counted vote, to meet a 2/3 requirement or to meet the satisfaction of a board member, you need to record how each one of those votes went. Who voted yes, who voted no. And that all needs to be reflected in your minutes. Voting all members do have a responsibility to vote. They need to understand that, but also understanding that they have a responsibility to abstain from voting if they have a conflict of interest. We have extensive guidance we can give on what that conflict of interest could look like. But one thing that is important that I want to clarify here, that you as staff need to understand, that board chairs need to understand, if someone is abstaining from a vote due to a conflict of interest, they can still be in the room during discussion. They can still engage in discussion. they just cannot vote to determine whether or not that is approved or declined. There was some confusion, I think, recently in some boards where they thought that person had to leave the room, and so they were kind of expelling those members with conflict of interest during discussion and voting. That technically is in violation of an open meetings requirement. Unless you are in private executive session, you are operating an open meeting where anyone, general public, including your board members, can be involved. And so those board members who may have a conflict can still be engaged in discussion. They can offer their opinion and color to the discussion, but they cannot vote yes or no on whether or not it's approved by the board. So I think that's an important clarification. And I think another one that seems silly but it's important to know is a member can vote against their own motion. If something has been debated, a board member can move, I move that we consider this. And it may just be because they think it's apparent that it's going to be voted down and they plan to vote no, but just because you propose a motion or second that motion, that does not mean that you are voting in the affirmative for that motion. I think that's something that gets confused at times too, and there'll be a contentious issue that's probably not going to pass, and they have a hard time getting any action because no one will move or second the motion. A board member can second or motion or propose a motion that they plan to vote down. And again, a tie vote will always defeat a motion. And so that's the crux of that. These are some rules, some links where you can get more details on Robert's rules. You will see they've updated it many, many times to be in compliance with electronic meeting requirements and other things in terms of note-taking. And so if you want more discussion, any of these three are going to be helpful resources. And that is the end of what we have presented. I want to allow for some question and answer. Do we have any questions from anyone about any of the content we've covered today? Excellent. Well, it seems like I got you out a little early, 15 minutes. I didn't do it as early as I thought. Let's see. So we do have a question from Tiffany Andrews. Hold on a minute, let me see where it went. Do you have to keep minutes of committee meetings, and do they have to be approved by the full board? Okay, so this is a good question. In terms of by law, no, because technically your committees carry no official weight. There's no vote by your committee that then carries authority to say this has been approved. All your committees really are advisory councils that then recommend to the board. I still think, though, if you have, for the sake of open meetings, I think it's always good when you have committee meetings to conduct minutes of some sort so that you know what was discussed. It can be helpful. I doubt you'll ever have anyone on the outside that will request those, but I think it's good for internal processes so that if you ever need to recall discussion that happened during committee, or if your board members that aren't on this committee, when it comes before the board, want to know what they've said, I think it is good practice to take minutes there. It may not be to the level of granular detail that you do for the full board, and that's not something that you're required by law to post. Because again, you're not required to have committees. We encourage it. We think this work's complex, and as Keith said, it helps to have those smaller groups that can really digest issues. But again, just know anytime a committee approves something, all they're really doing is making a recommendation to the full board that they vote for something. But good question. Any other questions? Any questions? Carol raised her hand. Do you have a question, Carol? You can type it, or if you can unmute yourself. I don't want to move on without getting Carol's question. Yes, and so this presentation will be available online. Assuming everything went well, we recorded it as well. So you will see on the TCSG.edu/worksource, we have a tab that's resources for practitioners, and on there you will see a tab for the Workforce Georgia Academy. So we will upload this presentation and a video of the webinar as a whole, so you can have both if you need to access them later. And this one, usually I save it as a PDF, but I will actually do this one in the PowerPoint version so that you can go in and edit it as you need to customize this for your local, your local area. Any other questions? Excellent. Okay, Carol was going to ask for the availability of the presentation as well, so good we got that answered. But yeah, we'll definitely be up. We'll try to get it up as soon as we can. Can't promise today, but I know Robin will try to get it up as soon as we can. We'll work with Shamika's team. Any other questions? Well, if not, again, I do want to thank Keith and Brett for being willing to be on and share with us today, and I appreciate all of you guys who joined us today. Hope this was helpful. We do welcome, I know they usually do a survey, or even if not, you give us some feedback on this. We want to make sure that these are helpful and that we're not wasting your time or ours. So as we think of future seminars that we can do and webinars we can do, let us know of other topics you might wish that we would cover and things we can offer to you guys.
Appreciate it, Jamie.
Yeah, thank you, Keith.
All right, thank you everyone for participating. We'll continue to work through some of these technical and audio issues, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.